What's the date today? The 13th. Hey everybody, it's Dancing David. Welcome back to the Go No Go Safety Show. You can see all our videos at gonogo.org and check out the comments below here on YouTube or Facebook or wherever you might be watching the video. The idea of the Go No Go Safety Show is to talk with people, you, me, everybody about COVID-19 and how we can feel safe in this world that we're living in, how we get back to living even better than we did before the pandemic and before the virus. And we have here with us today Dr. Ari Levitt. Hey, Ari.
Hi, David.
Thanks for coming on the show today.
A pleasure.
And so we have an open kind of forum for today. I was thinking about all the conversations we're having internally at Go No Go about countries and their different healthcare systems and how things get approved or not approved and how they work and all the money and everything. And so I think there's kind of one thread around that could be interesting for people to hear about from the inside, from people that are working inside of healthcare. And then also there's this whole line of thinking on the clinical side, which you have some exposure to as a doctor about kind of this disease and disease in general, and how we can go back to ease in our lives and how we can stay in ease in our lives and have a lower likelihood of disease. Obviously, I think one thing that's been positive about COVID as an experience generally, and this is my hypothesis, I don't know if it's true or not, but I feel like because it's such a worldwide thing and because there's so much talk about it, that I hope that people in general who otherwise don't really focus on their own health start to think about, the idea of what is an immune system and how do I have a strong immune system? I know for sure that there are a lot of people, especially the last 15, 20 years, who do yoga and juicing and, vegan. There's a big number of people that do that. And so obviously they're aware of their health in a kind of more active way, maybe than we ever have been as a humanity in the past. And at the same time, there's a whole bunch of people who aren't that way. And that's okay. Everybody can do everything. But I think what's interesting about COVID is that having a weak immune system really is potentially a matter of, I don't want to be scary, but really life and death. And so maybe we could kind of talk on that topic, and then we could talk also generally about kind of health systems and thoughts about that. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Yeah. So do you want to share with us, I know you and I had talked a little bit about your ideas about kind of the 5-level system for health, and how does that relate to immune system and like being aware of your own health?
Well, I think everything you're saying is really germane to what's going on now in the world. I think having an international global pandemic like this just begs the question about where did it come from, what caused it, why are there different populations that seem to be more or less vulnerable to this, what were the conditions that might have led up to that vulnerability. And there's been a lot of discussion and talk, and much of it is hypothetical, but much of it is actually based on work that's been going on for a long time in healthcare and also in environmental science. So going back to that idea that you had talked about having a healthy immune system, the connection that I've been thinking about and hearing a lot about is how our environment is possibly set up those pre-existing conditions for us in ways that we didn't anticipate. One of the statistics has shown that a lot of people in very concentrated cities have been, getting more of the virus. And there's talk about whether, of course, the concentration, the exposures are going to be one of the risks, but also those, if you look at a map, those tend to be some of the most polluted areas, right? So we know that people who've been smoking are at a much higher risk for lung damage and especially for COVID. And if you live in a high pollution area, like those areas of China or in some parts and cities in the US and around the world, living in a very polluted air environment is tantamount to having smoked a certain number of cigarettes a day for however many years you've been living there. So I think it has been connected in calling the question to our global environmental health, our personal health, and again, one of the conditions that have kind of been set up to put us at risk. And that was in one breath, I said that, just to...
That was amazing.
one quick thought.
Your respiratory system is working well. So I
Yeah.
almost forgot. Go ahead.
And you're in, where are you, David? Where are you talking from?
Oh, I'm in San Jose, California.
So you're in a lovely part of the world, but you also have areas there where you've got some air pollution down in LA, and it'd be interesting. What are your thoughts about? Are you
Yeah.
feeling grateful to be living in a sunny, clean environment now?
Yeah. So I lived in Saratoga Springs, New York for about 10 years. And before that in the Latham area. So both pretty low density, kind of suburban type of places. And, after being tired of the snow and the cold for so many years, we definitely looked around for many years we even Googled where are the healthiest cities in the country to live. And San Jose, I think, is one or two, or was when we Googled that 5 or 6 years ago, right? So it's amazing that we're here now, and it's interesting because Dawn and I, my wife and I, definitely are focused on our own health a lot, and so it's amazing that that brought us to this place, which is one of the healthiest places in the world to live. And so
Wow.
I'm really enjoying the sun, and as you mentioned, and the ability to get outside every day, and the ability to touch the earth and be connected to the earth every day. I think that's super important. And we ride our bikes to the grocery store, and that's amazing. And so it's good exercise, and it's fresh air, if you want to call it that. Of course, we have fresher air now than we've had in the last 50 years because there's so little driving and manufacturing, which is interesting, right? And so that's one of the things personally that I'm like a little scared about as we return to normal, going back to the pollution. But I think, so do you have any, I was wondering if you could share, Ari, kind of what is the immune system in a way that's kind of basic and easy for people to understand? Because I think, as you mentioned, the immune system is compromised and therefore more virus. And I was just wondering if you could just help people like understand what is the immune system, because it's pretty easy to understand the circulatory system, how your blood moves, and the respiratory system, how your air moves. What is the immune system, and how do we make it stronger? Obviously not smoking, like you said, right?
That's a great question. And just to encapsulate it, very simply, the immune system is it's your body's method to defend itself from foreign substances, many of which are not going to hurt you. Living in our environment all the time, but there are many, of course, which are toxic or noxious, like bacteria and viruses. And so your body has to have a way to recognize something that is not itself, that is foreign, and then to mount a response to help defend you from whatever bad outcomes might happen by exposure to that noxious agent. So the things that you might have heard the word antigen. An antigen is something beyond you, which invades you. And there's a number of ways in which your body has defense. The most obvious that you don't mention right away is your skin. So your skin is a huge part, if you want to call it part of your immune system, but it is a huge defense. And so if you have cuts or bruises or erosions or things that might allow bacteria to get into your skin, that is going to compromise your health. Parts of your skin, of course, you're breathing in air. You have several orifices which allow outside substances in. So if you're breathing air through your nostrils, through your pharynx, through your mouth, you're going to get outside things into your lungs. And so all along the pathway in your oral pharynx, in your bronchial trees, you have mucus and cilia, which capture sticky substance that captures bacteria, captures those things, and then slowly propels it back up into the back of your lungs where you swallow. And typically that is how you swallow saliva, but that's part of your body's defense mechanism for just general air. And then once the air gets into your lungs, and it may pass for viruses and bacteria that actually get into your bloodstream, then you have another immune defense system level, and that is your white blood cells and parts of your lymphoid system. And these are ways that your body, from within the body, can help to identify foreign antigens and to clean them out or destroy them. And there's many, many mechanisms that your body does for that. One of the things that we think of are antibodies. So that's a word that comes up quite frequently. because of the antibody tests that are being done. And your body is kind of set up and prepared to recognize foreign things. So there are certain cells in your body that make antibodies, and antibodies are floating around in the system, but they can also be stimulated to make particular kinds of antibodies that will attack particular kinds of antigens or foreign things. So these antibodies, you kind of think of it as like a jigsaw puzzle piece, right? There's many, many different shapes of the puzzle, but it has to click into another jigsaw puzzle piece. So the antibodies have that kind of configuration of a lock and key mechanism. So the antibodies are floating around your body and they're kind of bumping up against things. And it does two things when it bumps up against something. It could recognize it as self, in which case it won't bother it. Or if it doesn't recognize it as self, it'll see if it could lock into some part of the protein coat on that structure. And if it recognizes that protein coat, then it is stimulated to produce basically it sends out a message to the B cells that produce antibodies, telling them to really kick into production and make a lot more of these antibodies. And it becomes kind of an alarm system. So it recognizes this foreign coat on a bacteria or a virus, and it sets out the alarm. And then you have the B cells that are stimulated to produce more antibodies. You might have heard of T cells or white cells, and there's different kinds of those. Some of those cells will come and stimulate other parts of the immune system. They'll stimulate chemicals that will help to bring in more blood and more lymph, and to perhaps increase your temperature a little bit, which is oftentimes creating a fever, which is part of your body's immune system. And that's been known to help combat viruses. There's other white cells that are specifically Pac-Man kinds of cells. They're the macrophages, and they will come and gobble up the viruses or bacteria that have the alarms going off on them. And then they will also stimulate further parts of the immune system. So it's a very complex system, and it's amazing if you think how we've evolved to be this complicated. But over the hundreds of thousands and millions of years of our evolution, we've had a long time to think about how can we defend ourselves against things that are naturally in the environment. Was that simple enough? Or is that?
That was pretty thorough. I appreciate it and clear. And I like the analogy of Pac-Man. I always wondered why human beings like Pac-Man so much, and maybe it's because they realize on some level that it's a mirror of what's happening inside of them, right? We can relate to the outside from the inside in a way.
It's a little tender.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, so that was helpful a lot. Thank you. And there's kind of two directions that I'm thinking about from here. One is kind of understanding more about how do we make our immune system stronger, how do we measure the strength of our immune system, and the other one is there's obviously a lot of talk about vaccines and how does a vaccine fit into this whole antibody antigen kind of thing that you just spoke about. So maybe we just take those one at a time. How do we make our immune system strong, and how can we measure the strength of our immune system?
Well, I mean, that's a great philosophical question as well as a sort of anatomical and physiological question.
Okay.
One of the simple ways that we do it as a physicians is we just measure the amount of white blood cells in your bodies. It's a very simple test. And if your white blood cell count is very low, and you could look at the specific kinds of white blood cells, there's many different reasons any family of those might be low or high. You could look at, your own history, your susceptibility to getting coughs or viral infections or ear infections or, number of diseases. So, there's a lot of different ways you can make your own calculus about this. But in general, physicians in the clinic will use laboratory measures. People can use their own measures of how they're feeling. So it's a very subjective measure, and how many cases of whatever sickness you want to define you've had during the course of a year. So, and we know that your body's health is very connected to, and this is more of an Eastern, way of thinking about it, but your mentation, your body's physical stature, your nutrition, all of those things, and your physical health. So, your exercise, all those things will combine to make you a better fit person. And any one of those, is like pulling the leg out from the table. You could be physically fit, and you could be exercising, but you could be completely stressed at work and just feel depressed. And your immune system will be down because of that, which is amazing because that's more of a mentation. You could have a great, great positive thoughts, but you have no exercise, and you aren't getting out there and moving. And so again, diminish taxed when you have constant exposures to unhealthy environments. So again, people who live in polluted environments or very high stress environments, or places, they look at, people who've lived near toxic waste dumps or around nuclear plants or underneath electric telephone wires, get certain diseases more than other parts of the population. So those have affected the immune system in some way. So there's lots of elements that go into this. Okay. So I think the first step is becoming aware of what your risks are, and then being conscientious about making those kinds of behavioral changes. And like you were mentioning, very interestingly, that you were looking for a very healthy place to live as part of your moving strategy. And so I don't know how many people think about that as a criteria for where they choose to live, as opposed to, I just want to live where a job is, or I want to live where it's economically viable, or I want to live where my kids can go to school. But saying, I really want to look around the country and live in a place that has the cleanest air, is good for you. Touche.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The other thing that came up in that search was a lot of fresh vegetables. We're in the place in the world here where most of the vegetables in the world are grown within 200 miles of where I'm sitting, or 500 miles of where I'm sitting, or something like that. So, fresh vegetables that are grown in the sun, in the earth, are like super abundant right here.
It's actually funny you mentioned that, because very recently I have a friend who, I'm up in Seattle, Washington, but I have a friend who lives just out in one of the rural areas, and his wife has a beautiful little garden behind their house. Not little, it's actually kind of Midland size. And I was over there, not during COVID, but I was over there about 8 months ago, actually, maybe last fall during the harvest. And she has a little fence around the garden to keep the deer out. But when I walked into the garden, I felt like I was in one of those Mama, You Shrunk kids movies, because suddenly I went from this normal place and I walked in, and the blueberries, she had like olives, and the zucchinis were amazingly huge, and the plants were just thriving. And I knew she was kind of a serious gardener, more serious than I was. And I asked her about that. And I said, you must get really special seeds and things. She goes, no, regular seeds, just really good soil. Mm-hmm. Right. And then it makes you think about that analogy of, these are normal seeds, but they have good nutrition. And about, how our farming practices are, where we drain all the nutrition out of the soil or put them in chemically, but more importantly about our bodies, about, I know my sister is very much like you sound like you are, in terms of being very intentional about nutrition and eating only organic and making sure the kids have no sugar. They had no desserts and sugars. They always had fruit for dessert, but they had healthy, good, solid meals with lots of green leafy vegetables, lots of good food. And, the kids, grew up very healthy. And I think of another friend of mine who is in, one might say it's on the other side of the tracks, but it's a very impoverished area. And they have a food service in their elementary school that is open to all the kids. It's an elementary school, all the kids in the school, plus the brothers and sisters of the families of the kids. So they know there's a lot of needed students. And it sounds like it's a great program. Except when I was there, the food they were feeding them was horrible. I mean, the morning breakfast was donuts and Coca-Cola, and lunch was like, frozen pizza, and basically things that came frozen or came assembled, tater tots, sloppy Joe, just stuff that you could have a technician put together and fix, not a cook. And none of it was really nutritional. And these kids are morbidly obese and they're grogged out in the morning. They're on sugar highs, their mentation is compromised. So there's a huge difference between what we choose to feed ourselves and our nutrition, our health. And that directly applies to our immune system.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I know that there's a big TV show about food in the schools. Oliver, I forget the rest of his name, Food Revolution or something like that. Let's come back to the food piece another time. We are going to wrap up here shortly, Ari. The food is super important. I guess maybe just kind of one more thought on that, which is the way I think about it for myself, just as an engineer and as somebody who's been focused on my health all these years. I usually think about what you do the most matters the most, is kind of what I had thought in my head when I started thinking about this and writing about it. And so I had to think hard, like, okay, what do you do the most? What do you do the most? And what I came to the conclusion is what your body does the most is create new cells, right? You can tell me the number. I don't know if it's 1 million cells a day or 7 million cells a day or 1 million cells a second or whatever that number is. But fundamentally, you are recreating you every moment. And what does that mean? That means that it needs to have source material, food, energy, nutrition to make the new version of you. And so if that fuel that you're giving to you to make that new version of you is not what it takes to make that new version of you, that second version of you, the new cell, is going to be less. It's not going to be optimum. It's not going to function the way that it's supposed to function. And so that's the way I've been thinking about nutrition and oxygen specifically. It's because if the thing that my body does the most is recreate new cells, I want to have the cells that exist, the tools and resources to be able to make that new thing in a healthy way. What do you think?
That's true. That's true. That's why you're saying that some of your friends here are just knockoffs of their former selves.
All of me is, right? And in one sense,
No, it's very true. I mean, yeah, what you're
and,
saying is exactly true.
and thank you. And it's also that I have the ability to influence it. Not just that it's just a knockoff and then it's repeating. I can influence it with my choices, like you're saying, with my thoughts. You're using the word mentation. I think you're saying mentation, which isn't a word I've heard before, but I want to make clear to our audience that you're not saying meditation. You're saying mentation.
Mentation, you're thinking.
Which is kind of like the mental health of your thinking, right? And then that influences your reproduction of your biology, your reproduction of cells, which we could talk about probably more in the next safety show. And then, but I think the easiest way for people to get it is, like I just said, in terms of like the food is the material that you need to create that new version of you. And so it's really important to have that be as good as possible as can be.
Yeah, it's like my friend's garden. I mean, the things that go into the plants, and there it was very visibly obvious. But think about building a house. If you don't start with a good foundation and good nails and good wood behind the structure, the stuff you don't see is what the house is built on. That's the scaffolding of the house that holds it up. And if you just don't have good wood around and you're just saying, well, some cheap styrofoam or some plastic knockoffs, let's just throw that in there. And then you plaster it over. It looks like a house that's fairly good, but it's not going to last much.
Right.
So that's kind of like our own bodies and the construction, how we are. Good analogy. I like that.
That's awesome. Thank you. So any last takeaways before we wrap up for today's show?
Have a wonderful, worry-free day. Get some good food, no fast food,
Right.
and get some rest and sleep.
Yes, actually, I'm going to do that. Just so you know, everybody who's watching, the Go No Go is an app for detecting COVID using the sound of your voice. And we've been working on it now for a while. We have a nice team forming. Ari is our chief medical officer. And we've decided this weekend we're really going to focus a lot on making this happen. And so, I think I'll say this now because it's a challenge for a lot of us, but it's a challenge for me particularly, is to like balance that focused work with the rest time. So Ari, I appreciate you saying go get some sleep, and that's what I'm going to do. It's 1 o'clock here in California, and I'm going to take the rest of the day off so I can have that good balance and good energy and good function of my body. So thank you all for tuning in. I hope that you're in a place where you could get the support that you need to be healthy. And if you have questions, of course, post them here, wherever you're watching this video, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, whatever, or give us a call. Visit gonogo.org to see more helpful videos and let us know what you want us to talk about. Thanks so much for tuning in. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.